The morning Willa Dawson turned down her seventh marriage proposal in as many months. The entire town of Julian, California, gathered at the Mercantile to whisper about the beautiful young widow who seemed determined to spend the rest of her days alone on that struggling homestead of hers. It was the spring of 1878, and the small mining town nestled in the Cuyamaca Mountains had seen better days. The gold rush fever had cooled, leaving behind a community of stubborn souls who refused to abandon the land they had fought so hard to claim. Willa was one of those stubborn souls, though her reasons for staying had less to do with gold and more to do with the memories buried in the rocky soil of her husband's grave. She stood in front of the dry goods section, her worn calico dress freshly mended, her dark blonde hair pinned severely beneath a faded bonnet. At 24 years old, she carried herself with the rigid posture of someone twice her age, as if grief had settled into her very bones and turned her spine to iron. "Miss Willa, please reconsider," Thomas Henderson pleaded, his hat clutched in both hands, his face red with embarrassment and desperation. He was the banker's son, a soft-handed man of 27 who had never worked a day of hard labor in his life. "I can provide for you properly. You would want for nothing." "I want for nothing now, Mr. Henderson," Willa said quietly, her voice carrying none of the warmth that used to light up every room she entered. "Please accept my gratitude for your offer and my sincere refusal." "But that farm of yours is falling apart," Thomas pressed, and several women near the fabric display pretended to examine calico prints while straining to hear every word. "Everyone knows you can barely keep up with the work. It is not proper for a woman alone." Willa's jaw tightened, the only visible sign of her irritation. "I manage." "You are being unreasonable," Thomas said, his tone shifting from pleading to frustrated. "What are you waiting for? Jonathan has been dead for 3 years. It is time to move forward with your life." The Mercantile went silent. Even old Mr. Palmer stopped sweeping behind the counter. Speaking so bluntly about a woman's dead husband was beyond improper, it bordered on cruel. Willa's face drained of what little color it held, but her voice remained steady. "Good day, Mr. Henderson." She gathered the few supplies she could afford, paid with coins she had earned selling eggs that week, and walked out into the bright California sunshine with her head high and her heart locked away where no one could touch it. The ride back to her homestead took nearly an hour, her old mare plodding along the dusty road that wound through scrub, oak, and chaparral. The land here was beautiful in a harsh way, all golden hills and rocky outcroppings, with the promise of green meadows higher up in the mountains where snow still capped the peaks, even in spring. Her property sat in a small valley where Jonathan had once dreamed of raising cattle and children. They had managed to build a modest cabin, a small barn, and a chicken coop before the fever took him. He had been 26, strong and healthy 1 week, delirious and burning up the next, and gone before she could fully comprehend that he was leaving her. Willa unhitched the mare, fed the chickens, collected eggs, pulled weeds from her struggling vegetable garden, repaired a section of fence that had come loose, hauled water from the creek, and chopped wood until her hands blistered. She worked until the sun set, and her body ached so badly that she could barely think, because thinking meant remembering, and remembering meant feeling, and feeling was something she had sworn off the day she buried her husband. She was carrying an armload of firewood to the cabin when she noticed the stranger standing near her fence line, watching her. Willa's heart jumped, and she nearly dropped the wood. Men did not simply appear on isolated homesteads without reason, and those reasons were rarely good. She scanned the area for anything she could use as a weapon, mentally calculating the distance to the rifle she kept just inside the cabin door. "Easy, madam," the stranger said, raising both hands to show they were empty. "I am not here to cause trouble." He was tall and lean, wearing dusty work clothes and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. His horse, a sturdy bay gelding, grazed peacefully nearby, suggesting he had been standing there for some time. "Then state your business and be on your way," Willa said, keeping her voice firm despite the fear fluttering in her chest. "Name is Zachary Jennings," he said, taking off his hat to reveal dark hair and a weathered face that put him somewhere near 30 years old. "I own the ranch about 5 miles northeast of here. I have been meaning to introduce myself for some time, but I did not want to intrude on your grief." Willa said nothing, waiting. "I noticed your fence line is struggling on the eastern edge where it meets the open range," Zachary continued, his voice low and unhurried, as if he had all the time in the world. "Thought you should know before you lose any livestock to wandering." "I have no livestock to lose," Willa said curtly. "Just chickens, and they stay close to the coop." Zachary nodded slowly, turning his hat over in his hands. "Also wanted to mention that if you ever need help with heavy work, I am happy to lend a hand. Neighborly thing to do. I manage fine on my own." "I can see that," he said, and there was no mockery in his tone, just simple observation. "You have kept this place going longer than most thought you would," Willa bristled. "Most thought wrong, they did," Zachary agreed. He stood there for another moment, then settled his hat back on his head. "Well, I will leave you to your evening. Just wanted you to know I am nearby if you need anything." He walked to his horse with the easy gait of a man who spent most of his life in the saddle, mounted up, and rode away without another word or backward glance. Willa stood in her yard, arms still full of firewood, watching until he disappeared over the ridge. Something about the encounter unsettled her, though she could not pinpoint why. Zachary Jennings had been perfectly polite, had made no improper suggestions, and had left when dismissed. Yet his presence lingered in her mind as she went about her evening chores. That night, lying in the bed she had once shared with Jonathan, Willa stared at the ceiling and tried to remember what her husband's voice had sounded like. The memories were fading despite her desperate attempts to hold on to them, like water slipping through her fingers no matter how tightly she tried to grasp. 3 weeks passed before Willa saw Zachary Jennings again. She had gone into town for supplies and was struggling to load a heavy sack of flour onto her wagon when he appeared at her elbow. "Let me help with that," he said quietly, already reaching for the sack. Willa wanted to refuse, but the flour weighed 50 pounds and her arms were trembling from the effort of trying to hoist it up. She stepped back and let him load it into the wagon bed with easy strength. "Thank you," she said stiffly. "You are welcome." He tipped his hat and turned to go. "Mr. Jennings," Willa heard herself say, though she had not planned to speak. "Why did you really come by my property 3 weeks ago?" Zachary stopped and turned back to her, his expression thoughtful. In the full daylight of Main Street, she could see him more clearly. He had strong features, sun-weathered skin, and hazel eyes that seemed to miss nothing. There was something steady about him, like an oak tree that had weathered too many storms to be shaken by wind. "To introduce myself, like I said," he replied. "Men do not introduce themselves to widows without ulterior motives," Willa said bluntly. "Everyone in this town either wants to marry me or wants my land. Which is it for you?" Something that might have been amusement flickered across Zachary's face. "Neither, madam. I have enough land of my own and no interest in marriage." "Then why?" "Because you are my neighbor," he said simply. "And neighbors look out for each other in these parts. That is all." Willa studied him, searching for the lie, but his gaze remained steady and open. "I do not need looking after." "Did not say you did," Zachary replied. But if you ever change your mind about help with that eastern fence line, the offer stands." He walked away before she could respond, disappearing into the blacksmith shop across the street. Margaret Palmer, the mercantile owner's wife, appeared at Willa's side, her eyes bright with curiosity. "That is Zachary Jennings. Bought the old Morrison place 2 years ago and turned it into something profitable. Keeps to himself mostly. Never seen him court anyone or even attend a social. Quiet as they come." "I did not ask," Willa said, climbing onto her wagon seat. "Just thought you might want to know," Margaret said with a knowing smile, "since he seemed mighty helpful just now." Willa drove her wagon out of town without responding, but she could feel the eyes of every gossip watching her leave, their minds already weaving stories that had no basis in truth. The summer heat arrived with a vengeance, turning the golden hills to brown and drying up the smaller creeks. Willa's vegetable garden struggled despite her constant care, and the chickens produced fewer eggs in the oppressive heat. She rationed her supplies carefully, knowing that winter would be even harder if she could not build up reserves now. One scorching afternoon in July, she was working on repairing the chicken coop roof when the old ladder she was using suddenly cracked. Willa felt herself falling, had just enough time to think that this was how she would die, alone and broken on her own property, when strong arms caught her. Zachary Jennings set her on her feet gently, steadying her until she found her balance. His horse stood near the fence again, and Willa realized with a start that this was the third time he had appeared at her property, always seeming to arrive when she needed help most. "That ladder is rotted through," Zachary said, examining the broken pieces. "Dangerous to use." Willa's heart was still racing from the fall, her hands shaking. "I will get another one." "Where?" Zachary asked reasonably. "Nearest lumber mill is 2 days' ride, and a new ladder would cost more than you can spare." "How do you know what I can spare?" Willa snapped, embarrassment making her sharp. "I know that everyone in Julian watches everyone else," Zachary said calmly. "I know that you have turned down 7 marriage proposals. I know that you sell eggs and occasionally garden vegetables when you can grow enough. I know that you have not hired help since your husband died, which means you either cannot afford it or refuse it on principle." Willa's hands clenched into fists. "So you have been asking about me." "No, madam, I just pay attention." Zachary looked up at the half-repaired chicken coop roof. "I have a ladder you can borrow, a good one. I will bring it by tomorrow." "I do not want your charity." "It is not charity, it is lending. You give it back when you are done." He picked up his hat from where it had fallen during her rescue and dusted it off. "I am also going to fix that roof for you before you break your neck trying to do it yourself." "No," Willa said firmly. "I do not need your help." For the first time, something like frustration crossed Zachary's face. "Why?" The question caught her off guard. "What? Why do you not need help?" Zachary asked, his voice still level but with an edge to it now. "Why do you refuse everyone who offers? Why are you working yourself to death on a homestead that is too much for one person to manage?" "That is none of your concern," Willa said, but her voice wavered. "Maybe not," Zachary agreed, "but I am making it my concern anyway. Not because I want to marry you or take your land, but because watching you suffer when help is available is not something I can do." "Then stop watching," Willa shot back. "Cannot do that either," Zachary said. "You are my neighbor." They stood facing each other in the dusty yard, the sun beating down mercilessly, chickens clucking in the background. Willa felt tears burning behind her eyes and hated herself for the weakness. "Why do you care?" she whispered, the question torn from somewhere deep inside her. "Everyone else just wants something from me." "What do you want?" Zachary was quiet for a long moment, his hazel eyes searching her face. I want to know why a woman who clearly loved her husband and her home is trying so hard to destroy herself. I want to know what you are punishing yourself for." The tears spilled over before Willa could stop them. She turned away quickly, furious at herself for breaking down in front of this stranger, but the dam had cracked, and 3 years of held-back grief came pouring through. "I killed him," she choked out, the words she had never spoken aloud finally escaping. "The fever, it came from me. I got sick first, just a little, barely noticed it. But I gave it to Jonathan, and he died, and I lived, and it should have been me in that grave." Her legs gave out and she sank to the ground, sobbing with her face in her hands. All the pain she had locked away, all the guilt and anger and unbearable loneliness crashed over her in waves. Zachary knelt beside her, not touching her but close enough that she could feel his presence. "That is not how fever works," he said gently. "You did not kill your husband. The sickness did." "Everyone in town said it," Willa gasped between sobs. "They whispered that I survived and he did not, that I should have been able to save him, that if I had been a better wife, a better nurse, he would have lived." "They are wrong," Zachary said with quiet certainty. "I lost my wife and baby daughter to fever 6 years ago. I thought the same things you are thinking. Blamed myself for not being there when they needed me, for not getting the doctor fast enough, for not praying hard enough. But grief makes liars of us all. The only truth is that fever takes who it takes, and the ones left behind have to find a way to keep living." Willa looked up at him through her tears, seeing the old pain in his eyes, the scars that time had softened but not erased. "How?" "By accepting that surviving is not a betrayal," Zachary said. "By letting yourself be helped when help is offered. By understanding that being alone and being lonely are not the same thing, and choosing which one you actually want." "I do not deserve to be happy," Willa said, but the words had less conviction now. "Your husband, did he love you?" Zachary asked. "Yes," Willa whispered. "Then he would not want this for you. He would want you to live, really live, not just exist." Zachary stood up slowly, offering her his hand. "Let me fix your roof. Not because you owe me anything or because I want anything from you, but because it needs fixing and I can do it. That is all." Willa looked at his outstretched hand for a long moment, feeling as if she stood at a crossroads. She could refuse, send him away, continue down the path of self-destruction she had been walking for 3 years. Or she could take his hand and perhaps, just perhaps, find a different path. She took his hand. Zachary pulled her to her feet gently, then released her hand immediately, maintaining proper distance. "I will be back tomorrow morning with the ladder and supplies. I will work while you go about your business. You do not have to talk to me or even acknowledge I am here if you do not want to." "That would be rude," Willa said, wiping her face with her apron. "I have been called worse things than rude," Zachary said with a slight smile. He walked to his horse and mounted up. "Tomorrow, then." Willa watched him ride away, feeling lighter somehow, as if confessing her guilt to someone who understood had lifted a weight she had not realized she was carrying. True to his word, Zachary appeared the next morning just after sunrise, a good ladder strapped to his horse along with new shingles and tools. He worked silently while Willa did her chores, neither of them speaking beyond basic pleasantries. But there was something companionable about his presence, something that eased the oppressive loneliness of the homestead. He returned the next day, and the next, working on various repairs around her property. He fixed the fence line he had mentioned weeks ago, shored up the barn's sagging wall, replaced rotted boards in the cabin's front porch. Willa tried to protest at first, insisting it was too much, but Zachary simply continued working as if he had not heard her. On the 4th day, Willa brought him a cup of water while he worked on clearing brush away from the cabin to reduce fire danger. "Why are you doing all this?" she asked, genuinely bewildered. "What do you get out of it?" Zachary took the cup gratefully, drinking deeply before answering. "I get to go home at night knowing I did something useful. I get to see a good piece of land being cared for properly. I get to not feel so alone myself." "You are lonely?" Willa asked, surprised. "Everyone is lonely sometimes," Zachary said. "Even people who choose to live alone." "Is that why you never attend socials?" The question slipped out before Willa could stop it. "Sorry, that is not my business." "It is all right," Zachary said. "I do not attend socials because I am not good at small talk or pretending to be interested in gossip. I prefer honest conversation or comfortable silence to forced pleasantries." "I used to love socials," Willa said quietly, sitting down on a nearby log. "Before Jonathan died, I loved dancing and laughing and being part of the community, but afterward, everyone looked at me with such pity. They wanted to help, but only in ways that benefited them. Marriage proposals from men who wanted a housekeeper or a mother for their children. Offers to buy my land at a fraction of its worth. Sympathy that felt more like judgment." "So you stopped going," Zachary said, understanding. "So I stopped going," Willa confirmed, "and I stopped letting anyone close enough to hurt me again." "Does that work?" Zachary asked. Willa met his eyes. "No, it just makes everything hurt all the time instead of sometimes." They sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the buzzing of insects and the distant call of a hawk. It was the most peaceful Willa had felt in 3 years. "Tell me about your wife," she said finally. "If you want to." Zachary was quiet for so long that Willa thought he would not answer. Then he began to speak, his voice low and measured. "Her name was Sarah. She was 19 when we married. I was 24. She had red hair and freckles and the loudest laugh I ever heard. We had 2 good years together before she got pregnant. She was so happy, planning everything, making clothes for the baby, talking about teaching our daughter to ride horses and rope cattle." "What happened?" Willa asked softly. "Baby came early," Zachary said, staring at nothing. "We were living in Texas then, miles from anyone. I rode for the doctor, but by the time we got back, both Sarah and the baby were burning with fever. They died within hours of each other. I buried them together on a hillside overlooking the ranch." "I am so sorry," Willa whispered. "I sold that place as soon as I could bear to leave them," Zachary continued. "Drifted for a couple of years, working different ranches, trying to outrun the grief. Finally, ended up here in Julian and decided it was as good a place as any to try again." "You want to marry again?" Willa asked. "Have more children?" "I did not think so," Zachary said slowly. "Thought that part of my life was over. But lately I have been wondering if maybe I was wrong, if maybe shutting yourself off from the possibility of happiness is just another way of dying." He looked at Willa as he said it, and she felt something shift in the air between them, something fragile and frightening and full of potential. "I should get back to work," Zachary said, standing up. "I want to finish this section before the heat gets too bad." Willa nodded, taking the empty cup back to the cabin. Her hands were shaking again, but this time it was not from fear or exhaustion. It was from the terrifying realization that she was starting to look forward to Zachary Jennings' visits, that his presence had become something she anticipated rather than dreaded. The weeks passed in a new rhythm. Zachary would arrive in the early morning, work on whatever task needed doing, eat the lunch Willa prepared for them both, work some more, then head home before dark. They talked more as time went on, sharing stories about their pasts, their dreams, the small observations that make up daily life. Willa learned that Zachary had grown up in Missouri, the youngest of 5 brothers, and had headed west at 18 seeking his own fortune. He had worked as a cowhand, a trail driver, a ranch foreman before finally saving enough to buy his own land. He liked his coffee black, hated beans, and had a surprising knowledge of wildflowers. Zachary learned that Willa had been born in California, the daughter of a merchant who died when she was 10, leaving her mother to run the store alone. She had married Jonathan when she was 21, full of hope and plans for their future. She could recite poetry from memory, made the best biscuits in 3 counties, and was terrified of snakes. "I have something I need to tell you," Willa said one afternoon in late August as they sat in the shade of the barn, cooling off after working in the garden. "I have been thinking about what you said, about choosing whether to be alone or lonely." Zachary waited, his attention fully on her. "I do not want to be lonely anymore," Willa said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I am scared. Scared of betraying Jonathan's memory. Scared of caring about someone and losing them again. Scared of being happy when I do not deserve it." "You deserve happiness," Zachary said firmly. "You deserve peace and joy and love. You deserve all of it." "Do you think you could love again?" Willa asked, her heart pounding. After losing Sarah, Zachary reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. His palm was calloused and warm, strong and gentle at the same time. "I think I already am," he said quietly. Willa's breath caught. "You should not. I am broken. I am difficult and stubborn, and half the time I do not even know who I am anymore." "You are a woman who fought to survive when it would have been easier to give up," Zachary said. "You are strong and capable and brave enough to still be standing when most would have fallen. You are exactly who you need to be." "I do not know how to do this," Willa said, tears spilling down her cheeks again, but this time they were different tears, born of hope rather than grief. "I do not know how to let someone in again." "We will figure it out together," Zachary said, squeezing her hand gently. "No rush, no pressure. Just 2 people trying to find their way out of the dark." Willa squeezed back, feeling as if she were stepping off a cliff into thin air, trusting that somehow she would not fall. The town of Julian noticed the change in Willa Dawson immediately. She started attending Sunday services again, standing beside Zachary Jennings in quiet solidarity. They did not hold hands or show any public affection, but everyone could see the way they gravitated toward each other. The way Willa's shoulders relaxed when he was near. The way Zachary's eyes followed her protectively. The gossip mills worked overtime. Some people thought it was too soon, that Willa was disrespecting her late husband's memory. Others were simply glad to see her healing. The 7 rejected suitors had mixed reactions, from Thomas Henderson's bitter resentment to old Mr. Grayson's genuine happiness for her. Willa found that she cared less about others' opinions than she ever had before. Zachary had helped her see that her life was her own to live, that she owed no one explanations or justifications for her choices. One evening in September, as the heat finally began to break and the first hints of autumn touched the air, Zachary stayed later than usual. They sat on Willa's newly repaired porch, watching the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "I want to court you properly," Zachary said without preamble. "I want to take you to dinner in town, to the harvest dance next month, to meet the few friends I have. I want everyone to know that you are important to me." "What if I am not ready?" Willa asked honestly. "Then we wait," Zachary said simply. "I am not going anywhere. What if I am never ready? Then we stay friends, and I count myself lucky to have that." Zachary looked at her seriously. "But I think you are selling yourself short. I think you are braver than you believe." Willa took a deep breath, feeling as if she stood at another crossroads. "Ask me again." "What?" "What everyone has been asking me for 3 years," Willa said. "Ask me now." Zachary searched her face, then seemed to understand. He stood up and offered her his hand. "Miss Willa Dawson, Would you do me the honor of allowing me to court you?" Willa placed her hand in his and stood, facing him. In the golden light of sunset, she could see every line on his face, every scar, every mark left by years of hard work and harder grief. He was not perfect or unmarked by life, and neither was she, but maybe that was the point. Maybe two broken people could build something whole together. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Zachary Jennings, I would be honored." The smile that spread across Zachary's face was like sunrise after a long night, and Willa felt something inside her that had been frozen for 3 years finally begin to thaw. He pulled her gently into his arms, holding her carefully as if she were something precious and fragile. Willa leaned her head against his chest and listened to the steady beat of his heart, realizing that this was what she had been missing. Not just romantic love, but simple human connection, the comfort of being held by someone who cared. "We will take this slow," Zachary murmured into her hair. "As slow as you need." "What if I do not want slow?" Willa asked, pulling back to look at him. "What if I have wasted enough time already?" "Then we go at whatever pace feels right," Zachary said. "There is no rule book for this." Willa reached up and touched his face, tracing the strong line of his jaw, feeling the slight roughness of evening stubble. "I want to kiss you," she whispered. "Is that terrible? Is it too soon?" "Nothing you feel is terrible," Zachary assured her, "but only if you are sure." In answer, Willa rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle and tentative at first, both of them learning each other, finding their way. Then it deepened, 3 years of loneliness and longing pouring into the connection. Zachary's arms tightened around her, and Willa felt her heart, that organ she had thought irreparably damaged, suddenly beat with renewed strength. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Willa was crying again. But these were healing tears, the kind that washed away old pain and made room for new joy. "I love Jonathan," she said, needing Zachary to understand. "I will always love him. He was my first love, my first everything." "I know," Zachary said, brushing tears from her cheeks with his thumb. "And I loved Sarah. We do not have to stop loving them to love each other. The heart is big enough for both." It was exactly what Willa needed to hear, and she realized that Zachary understood because he had walked this same difficult path. They were both learning to live again, to love again, to believe that second chances were not betrayals but gifts. The autumn passed in a golden haze of new love. Zachary courted Willa with patient devotion, bringing her wildflowers he picked on his rides, helping with her never-ending chores, sitting with her in the evenings as they talked about everything and nothing. He never pushed, never demanded more than she was ready to give, but his steady presence became the foundation on which she rebuilt her life. Willa attended the harvest dance on Zachary's arm, her first social event in 3 years. She wore her best dress, a deep blue calico that had been carefully stored away, and let her hair down from its severe style. The transformation shocked the town. She looked young again, alive, the beauty that grief had hidden shining through. They danced together, Zachary proving surprisingly graceful for such a big man, and Willa remembered what it felt like to laugh, to spin across a floor without a care, to feel joy bubbling up from some long-buried place inside her. "You look happy," Zachary said as they took a break, standing outside in the cool night air. "I am happy," Willa said, surprised to realize it was true. "I did not think I would ever feel this way again." "You deserve it," Zachary said, pulling her close. "You deserve every good thing this world has to offer." Over the next months, their relationship deepened and grew. Zachary asked Willa to come see his ranch, and she was impressed by what he had built. The house was well constructed and comfortable, the barn spacious and well maintained, the cattle healthy and numerous. He had created a thriving operation through hard work and careful planning. "I built all this thinking I would live here alone forever," Zachary said as they stood on his porch overlooking his land. "But now I cannot stop imagining you here with me." "Is that a proposal?" Willa asked, her heart racing. "Not yet," Zachary said. "When I propose, you will know it. But I am telling you my intentions. I want to marry you, Willa. I want to build a life together, combine our properties, raise cattle and children, and grow old watching sunsets from this porch." "I want that too," Willa admitted. "But I need more time. I need to be sure that I am choosing this for the right reasons, not just because I am lonely or scared." "Take all the time you need," Zachary assured her. "I will be here." Winter came to the mountains, bringing snow and cold and shorter days. Willa's cabin was not well insulated, and she struggled to keep warm despite the fire burning constantly in the hearth. Zachary worried about her out there alone, but she stubbornly insisted on maintaining her independence, at least for now. Then one night in January, a major storm rolled in, dropping 2 feet of snow and bringing temperatures so low that water froze in its bucket. Willa huddled by the fire, wearing every piece of clothing she owned, trying to keep warm. The wind howled around the cabin, finding every crack and gap, and she wondered if she would survive until morning. At dawn, she heard someone calling her name. She struggled to the door and opened it to find Zachary leading his horse through the deep snow, his face red with cold and etched with worry. "Thank God," he said when he saw her. "I was afraid you might have frozen. You are coming back to my place until this storm passes." "I cannot leave the chickens," Willa protested through chattering teeth. "I will bring them too if I have to," Zachary said firmly. "You will die if you stay here. This cabin cannot handle a storm like this." He was right, and Willa was too cold to argue. She gathered her most essential possessions while Zachary collected the chickens into a crate he had brought, then helped her onto his horse. The ride to his ranch was brutal, the wind cutting through them like knives, but Zachary's warm house was a blessing beyond measure. He settled Willa by his large stone fireplace, wrapped her in quilts, made her hot coffee and soup. The chickens went into a protected corner of his barn, and slowly, as warmth returned to her body, Willa began to shake not from cold but from the realization of how close she had come to disaster. "I was being stubborn," she said through tears. "I could have died. But you did not," Zachary said, holding her close. "You are safe now." The storm lasted 3 days, and by the time it cleared, Willa had made a decision. She belonged here with Zachary, in this warm house that he wanted to share with her. Staying alone on her failing homestead was not strength. It was stubborn pride, and pride was a cold companion on winter nights. "I am ready," she told Zachary on the morning the sun finally broke through the clouds. "Whatever you want to ask me, I am ready to hear it." Zachary set down his coffee cup and came to kneel before her chair. He took both her hands in his hazel eyes serious and full of love. "Willa Dawson, you are the strongest, bravest, most stubborn woman I have ever known. You have survived grief that would have broken most people. You have learned to live again, to trust again, to open your heart when it would have been easier to keep it closed. I love you more than I thought I could ever love anyone again. Will you marry me? Will you share this life with me, build a future together, and let me spend every day trying to make you happy?" "Yes," Willa said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you, Zachary Jennings." He pulled her out of the chair and into his arms, kissing her deeply while outside the world sparkled white and new, a blank page waiting to be written. They married in early spring of 1879, a simple ceremony in the Julian church with the whole town in attendance. Willa wore a new dress that Zachary had insisted on buying for her, pale yellow with white lace, and carried wildflowers picked fresh that morning. Zachary wore his best suit, looking uncomfortable but happy, his eyes never leaving his bride. The ceremony was short and sweet, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Zachary kissed Willa with such tender joy that several women in attendance wiped away tears. Even Thomas Henderson, watching from the back, had to admit they looked right together, two people who had found each other in the aftermath of loss. The reception was held at the town hall, with music and dancing and more food than anyone could eat. Willa danced with her new husband, with old friends she had neglected, with neighbors who welcomed her back into the community. She felt lighter than air, as if the weight of grief had finally been lifted, replaced with cautious but growing happiness. "Are you happy?" Zachary asked as they danced together, his arms secure around her waist. "Deliriously," Willa said, meaning it. "Are you?" "More than I ever thought possible," Zachary admitted. "Thank you for giving me a second chance." "Thank you for being patient enough to wait for me," Willa replied. "Thank you for asking why instead of just giving up." They left the reception as the sun was setting, riding together to Zachary's ranch that was now their ranch, ready to begin their new life together. Willa took one last look at her old homestead as they passed it, feeling a bittersweet pang. Jonathan was buried there, and part of her heart would always remain with him. But she was learning that the heart could hold multiple truths at once, could honor the past while embracing the future. Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. Combining two properties meant endless work, and they spent long days repairing Willa's old cabin to use for hired hands, moving her meager possessions to their shared home, integrating her chickens with Zachary's larger operation. But they worked side by side, partners in every sense of the word, and the labor felt lighter when shared. Willa learned the rhythms of ranch life, helping with the cattle, riding out to check fence lines, managing the household and the books. Zachary taught her to rope and brand, and she taught him that a home was more than just a place to sleep between work days. Together they built something neither could have achieved alone. In the fall of that first year, Willa began to suspect she might be pregnant. The signs were subtle at first, morning queasiness and unusual fatigue, but as the weeks passed, her suspicions grew stronger. She was both thrilled and terrified, remembering Zachary's story of losing his wife and child in childbirth. "I have something to tell you," she said one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, a ritual they had maintained from their courting days. Zachary looked at her, and something in her expression made him go very still. "What is it?" "I think I am going to have a baby," Willa said, watching his face carefully for a moment. Zachary did not react at all, as if her words had not registered. Then understanding dawned, followed by a complex mix of emotions that Willa could read clearly. Joy, fear, hope, and old grief all warring for dominance. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice rough. "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor," Willa said. "I am about 2 months along, I think." Zachary stood abruptly and walked to the edge of the porch, gripping the railing with white knuckles. Willa gave him space, understanding that he needed to process his fear before he could embrace his joy. "I cannot lose you," he said finally, his voice breaking. "I cannot go through that again." Willa went to him and wrapped her arms around him from behind, pressing her face against his back. "You will not lose me. I am strong and healthy. We will get the best doctor, take every precaution, I will be careful." "Sarah was strong and healthy too," Zachary said. "I am not Sarah," Willa said gently. "And this baby is not that baby. We cannot live our lives afraid of what might happen." Zachary turned in her arms and held her tightly, and Willa felt him trembling. "I am scared," he admitted. "So am I," Willa said, "but I am also happy." "We are going to have a child, Zachary, a little person who is part both of us." That is a miracle, even if it is a scary one. You are right, Zachary said, pulling back to look at her. You are right. I am happy, I am terrified, but I am happy. They held each other as the sun finished setting. Two people who had survived the worst life could throw at them, daring to hope for the best. The pregnancy progressed normally, and with each passing month, Zachary's fear eased slightly. He was attentive to the point of being overprotective, refusing to let Willa do any heavy work and fussing over her constantly. Willa tolerated it with patient amusement, understanding that this was his way of coping with his anxiety. They made the trip to the doctor in San Diego twice, a grueling 2-day journey each way, but Zachary insisted it was worth it to ensure everything was progressing well. The doctor proclaimed Willa healthy and the baby thriving, which eased Zachary's mind considerably. In April of 1880, on a warm spring morning, Willa's labor began. Zachary, despite all his preparations and planning, nearly panicked. He had arranged for a midwife to stay at their ranch for the last month of Willa's pregnancy, and the competent older woman took charge immediately, shooing Zachary out of the bedroom and getting to work. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the day and into the night. Zachary paced the porch, praying and worrying in equal measure, jumping at every sound from the house. He had never felt so helpless, so aware of how little control he had over the things that mattered most. Just before dawn, he heard a baby's cry, thin and indignant, and his heart nearly stopped. He waited for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes before the midwife appeared at the door, smiling. "You have a son," she said, "strong and healthy, and your wife is tired but doing well. You can come meet him now." Zachary practically ran to the bedroom. Willa lay propped up in bed, exhausted and sweaty and more beautiful than he had ever seen her, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket. She looked up as he entered, and her smile was radiant. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Zachary approached slowly, almost afraid that if he moved too quickly, this moment would shatter like a dream. He looked down at the baby and felt his heart crack open in a way he had forgotten was possible. The baby was tiny and red-faced, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that seemed to look right through him. "He is perfect," Zachary whispered, reaching out to touch one impossibly small hand. The baby's fingers wrapped around his thumb instinctively, and Zachary felt tears streaming down his face. "You are perfect. What should we name him?" Willa asked, watching her husband with tender understanding. They had discussed names over the past months but had never quite decided. Now, looking at his son, Zachary knew exactly what felt right. "Jonathan," he said, "after your first husband." "He should be honored, not forgotten." Willa's eyes filled with tears. "Are you sure?" "I am sure," Zachary said firmly. "He was part of your journey, part of what made you the woman I love. Our son should carry his name forward." "Jonathan Zachary Jennings," Willa said, trying it out. "It sounds right." Zachary sat carefully on the edge of the bed, and Willa placed baby Jonathan in his arms. The infant squirmed and made small noises, and Zachary marveled at how light he was, how fragile and yet how perfectly formed. "I promise to protect you," Zachary murmured to his son. "I promise to teach you right from wrong, to help you become a good man. I promise to love you with everything I have." "We both do," Willa added, leaning her head on Zachary's shoulder. "Welcome to the world, little one." The first months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Baby Jonathan proved to have a healthy set of lungs and definite opinions about when he wanted to eat, sleep, or be held. Willa and Zachary stumbled through those early days in a haze of sleeplessness and fierce love, learning as they went. Zachary was a devoted father, changing diapers without complaint, walking the floor with a crying baby at 3 in the morning, singing lullabies in his rough voice that somehow always soothed the child. Watching him with their son, Willa fell in love with him all over again, seeing the gentle tenderness beneath his quiet strength. The ranch prospered as the years passed. Zachary proved to be an excellent cattleman, growing his herd and gaining a reputation for honest dealing and quality livestock. Willa managed the household and the books, kept the garden flourishing, and raised their son with patient devotion. They hired 2 hands to help with the heavy work, freeing up more time for family. When Jonathan was 2 years old, Willa discovered she was pregnant again. This time, Zachary's reaction was more measured, still fearful but better able to manage his anxiety. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and in the spring of 1883 they welcomed a daughter they named Clara Grace. Clara was the image of Willa, with blonde hair and blue eyes and a sunny disposition that brightened every room she entered. Jonathan, now a sturdy toddler, was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything and frequently needing to be reminded to be gentle. Their family felt complete, and Willa often marveled at how different her life was from what she had imagined during those dark years of widowhood. She had thought herself broken beyond repair, destined for loneliness and slow decline. Instead, she had found love again, had built a family, had created a life rich with purpose and joy. One evening when Clara was 6 months old, Willa and Zachary sat on their porch watching the sunset while their children slept inside. It was their favorite time of day, a peaceful moment before the evening chores needed doing. "Do you ever think about how close we came to missing this?" Willa asked, taking Zachary's hand. "If you had not asked me why, if I had kept pushing everyone away, we would never have this life." "I think about it sometimes," Zachary admitted. "I think about how lonely I was before you, how I had convinced myself that being alone was safer than risking my heart again." "What made you approach me that first time?" Willa asked. "Why me when you had been avoiding everyone else?" Zachary was quiet for a moment, considering. "I saw myself in you," he said finally. "I recognized the grief, the walls built so high nothing could get in. I knew what it felt like to be that lost. And I thought that maybe, just maybe, 2 people who understood loss could help each other find their way back to living." "You saved me," Willa said simply. "We saved each other," Zachary corrected. "You gave me a reason to risk my heart again. You showed me that second chances are not betrayals but blessings." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from orange to purple to deep blue, stars beginning to emerge in the darkening heavens. Inside, one of the children stirred and whimpered, and Zachary stood to check on them as he always did, unable to fully shake his fear of loss even now. But he returned moments later, reporting both children sleeping peacefully and settled back beside Willa. She leaned her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, feeling utterly content. "I love you," she said softly. "Thank you for being patient with me. Thank you for seeing past my walls to the person underneath." "I love you too," Zachary replied, kissing the top of her head. "Always have, always will." The years continued to pass in a golden procession of seasons. Jonathan grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved the ranch and the animals, following his father everywhere and absorbing lessons about cattle and land management. Clara was his opposite, bright and bubbly, making friends with everyone she met and turning every activity into a game. When Jonathan was 8 and Clara was 6, Willa discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was harder than the previous 2, and she spent much of it feeling exhausted and ill. Zachary worried constantly, hovering over her and insisting she rest, while the children tried to help in their own enthusiastic but not always helpful ways. In November of 1888, Willa went into labor 3 weeks earlier than expected. The birth was fast and intense, leaving her drained but otherwise healthy. This time they had twin boys, identical and tiny but with strong lungs and healthy appetites. "Two at once," Zachary said with wonder, holding one baby in each arm while Willa rested. "How are we going to tell them apart? We will figure it out," Willa said, exhausted but happy. "We always do." They named the twins Samuel and William, and life with 4 children proved exponentially more chaotic than with 2. But it was a joyful chaos, full of laughter and mess and constant activity. The house that had once echoed with loneliness now rang with children's voices, and both Willa and Zachary marveled at the transformation. Jonathan, as the oldest, took his role as big brother seriously, helping with the twins and teaching Clara to read and ride. Clara appointed herself the twins' entertainment director, constantly singing to them and making them laugh with silly faces. The family was a unit, bound together by love and shared purpose. The ranch continued to thrive, growing into one of the most successful operations in the area. Zachary's reputation for fair dealing and quality cattle meant he always had buyers for his stock, and the steady income allowed them to make improvements and expand. They built a larger barn, added a bunkhouse for their growing crew of hired hands, and expanded the house to accommodate their large family. Willa became known throughout Julian for her kindness and her strong will. She organized relief efforts when neighboring families faced hardship, hosted socials at the ranch, and served as an unofficial counselor to other widows learning to rebuild their lives. She never forgot the darkness she had endured, and she used that experience to help others find their way back to the light. One autumn afternoon in 1895, when Jonathan was 15 and preparing to take on more responsibility at the ranch, Willa stood in her kitchen making preserves from the fall harvest. Through the window, she could see Zachary teaching the twins, now 7 years old, how to rope a fence post while Clara, now 13 and beautiful, sat on the porch doing schoolwork. Margaret Palmer, now an old friend, sat at the kitchen table helping with the canning. "You have built a beautiful life," she observed. "I remember when you first came to town with Jonathan Dawson, so young and full of dreams. Then I remember after he died, how you seemed to wither away before our eyes. Many of us thought you would not make it." "I almost did not," Willa admitted, stirring the bubbling fruit. "I wanted to die for a long time. The grief was so heavy I did not think I could carry it another day." "What changed?" Margaret asked. "Zachary asked me why," Willa said simply. "Everyone else told me what I should do, what I should feel, what was proper or expected. But he asked me why I was doing what I was doing, why I was so determined to be alone. And in answering that question, I had to face truths I had been avoiding." "He is a good man," Margaret said. "You are lucky to have found each other." "I know," Willa said, looking out the window at her husband and children. "Every day I know." That evening, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Willa and Zachary took their customary places on the porch. It was cool now, with autumn's chill in the air, and they sat close together under a shared blanket. "Jonathan wants to start taking cattle to market himself next spring," Zachary said. "He thinks he is ready." "Is he?" Willa asked. "Yes," Zachary said with pride. "He is mature for his age, good with animals and people both. He will do fine." "When did our children get so grown up?" Willa wondered aloud. "It seems like just yesterday he was a baby in my arms." "Time moves faster than we think," Zachary said. "We have been married 16 years. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, sometimes like forever." "Forever in a good way," Willa clarified, squeezing his hand. "Forever in the best way," Zachary agreed. They sat in companionable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. This was their time, these quiet moments stolen from the chaos of daily life, where they could simply be together without the demands of children or ranch or community. "You ever regret it?" Zachary asked suddenly. "Taking a chance on me when you could have stayed safe behind your walls?" "Never," Willa said firmly. "Not for a single second. You gave me back my life, Zachary. You showed me that surviving loss does not mean you have to stop living." "You did the same for me," Zachary said. "I had given up on happiness, on family, on everything that makes life worth living. You reminded me that second chances exist, and that taking them is not a betrayal but an act of courage." "We were both brave," Willa said. "We were both willing to risk our hearts again despite knowing how badly they could break." "And it was worth it," Zachary said. "Every moment of fear, every difficult day, all of it was worth it to have this life with you." Willa leaned into him, and he wrapped his arms around her, holding her close as they watched the night settle over their land. Their land, their home, their life built together from the ashes of grief and loss. The years continued their relentless march forward. Jonathan took over more and more of the ranch operations, proving himself capable and innovative. He courted and married a local girl named Emma when he was 20, and they built a house on the far edge of the property, staying close to family while establishing their own life. Clara, beautiful and spirited, broke hearts throughout the county before falling in love with a schoolteacher from San Diego. She married at 19 and moved to the city, though she visited often and wrote long letters that kept Willa updated on every detail of her life. The twins, Samuel and William, developed distinct personalities as they grew. Samuel was quiet and artistic, more interested in books and drawing than ranch work, while William was all cowboy, living and breathing the ranch life. Both were good boys who grew into fine young men, and Willa and Zachary watched with pride as their children became adults. In 1903, when Willa was 49 and Zachary 54, they became grandparents for the first time. Jonathan and Emma welcomed a daughter they named Willa in honor of her grandmother, and holding that tiny baby, Willa felt the circle of life complete itself in the most beautiful way. More grandchildren followed over the years. Clara had 3 children. The twins eventually married and started families of their own. The ranch house that had once been too quiet became filled with the sounds of multiple generations, children and grandchildren running through rooms that echoed with laughter. Zachary and Willa gradually handed over the daily operations of the ranch to Jonathan while remaining active and involved. They still took their evening seat on the porch, watching sunsets and talking about everything and nothing, a ritual maintained over decades. One evening in the summer of 1915, when they had been married 36 years, they sat together as the sun painted the sky in brilliant colors. Willa was 71 now, her blonde hair gone silver, her face lined but still beautiful. Zachary was 76, moving more slowly but still strong, his love for his wife evident in every glance. "You remember the day we met?" Willa asked, taking his weathered hand in hers. "You were standing by my fence line, your horse grazing nearby, and I was so frightened because men appearing at isolated homesteads rarely meant anything good." "I remember," Zachary said with a slight smile. "You looked ready to brain me with that firewood you were carrying, fierce as a wildcat." "I was so angry at the world," Willa recalled, "so determined to punish myself for surviving when Jonathan did not. I had built such high walls around my heart. And I was so lonely," Zachary added, "convinced that being alone was better than risking loss again. We were quite a pair of fools." "But we found each other anyway," Willa said. Against all odds and despite our best efforts to remain isolated, we found each other. Because I asked you why, Zachary said. That simple question changed everything. It did, Willa agreed. You were the first person who wanted to understand instead of fix. The first person who saw my grief as something to be worked through, not gotten over. They sat in silence for a while, watching their grandchildren play in the yard below, their own children moving about the property they had built together. The ranch stretched out in all directions, prosperous and thriving, a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. I have had a good life, Willa said softly. Better than I ever imagined possible during those dark years. You gave me that, Zachary. We gave it to each other, Zachary corrected gently. Neither of us could have built this alone. It took both of us being brave enough to try again. I love you, Willa said, the same words she had spoken thousands of times over their decades together, but never losing their meaning. Thank you for not giving up on me. I love you too, Zachary replied, kissing her forehead tenderly. Always have, always will. You are the best decision I ever made. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars appeared, they remained on their porch, two people who had found each other in the aftermath of loss and built something beautiful together. They had faced grief and fear, had risked their hearts despite knowing how badly they could break, and had been rewarded with a life rich beyond measure. Their love story was not the fairy tale of youth, where everything comes easily and nothing costs. It was the hard-won love of two people who had survived the worst and chosen to hope anyway. It was the love of understanding and patience, of shared grief transformed into shared joy, of two broken pieces that fit together to make something whole. And as they sat together in the gathering dusk, surrounded by the family they had created and the life they had built, both knew that every painful step of their journeys had been worth it to arrive at this moment, in this place, together. The years that followed were gentle ones. Willa and Zachary slowed down naturally, spending more time on their porch and less time on horseback, but they remained engaged with their family and their community. They attended church every Sunday, hosted family dinners that filled the house with noise and love, and continued their ritual of watching sunsets together. In the spring of 1920, Zachary took ill. It started as a cough that would not go away, then progressed to weakness and difficulty breathing. The doctors came from San Diego and did what they could, but at 81 years old, Zachary's body was simply wearing out. He faced his approaching death with the same quiet strength he had brought to everything in his life. I am not afraid, he told Willa as she sat beside his bed holding his hand. I have had more happiness than any man deserves. You gave me that. We have had a good run, Willa said, tears streaming down her face despite her efforts to remain strong. 37 years of marriage, 4 children, 14 grandchildren, and more love than I knew existed. Take care of yourself after I am gone, Zachary said, his voice weak but firm. Do not make the mistake you made before, shutting yourself away from life. Promise me. I promise, Willa said, though her heart was breaking, but I do not know how to be without you. The same way you learned to be without Jonathan, Zachary said. By taking it one day at a time, by leaning on the people who love you, by remembering that surviving is not betraying. You taught me that. Remember your own lesson. Zachary Jennings died 3 days later, surrounded by his wife and children, at peace with the life he had lived. They buried him on a hillside overlooking the ranch, beside the plot that had been waiting for Willa. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives he had touched through his quiet kindness and steadfast integrity. Willa grieved, but this time it was different. She had learned through years of healing and love that grief and joy could coexist, that mourning someone did not mean stopping living. She cried, but she also laughed at memories. She felt the pain of loss, but she also felt gratitude for the years they had shared. She did not shut herself away. She continued to attend church, to host family dinners, to sit on her porch and watch sunsets even though it hurt to do so alone. Her children and grandchildren rallied around her, offering support and company, and she accepted their help with grace. One evening, about 6 months after Zachary's death, Jonathan found his mother on the porch as the sun was setting. He sat beside her quietly, and they watched the sky change colors together. "I miss him," Willa said simply. "We all do," Jonathan replied, "but he left us so much. This ranch, this family, the example of how to live with integrity and love. He saved my life, you know," Willa said. "When I was drowning in grief after your father, your namesake, died, Zachary threw me a rope and pulled me back to shore." "I know," Jonathan said. "He told me once that you saved his life too, that he had been just existing before he met you and you taught him how to truly live again." Willa smiled through her tears. "We saved each other. That is what love does, real love. It does not complete you as if you were incomplete before, but it makes you brave enough to be fully yourself." "Will you be all right?" Jonathan asked, concerned. "Yes," Willa said with certainty. "It will hurt for a long time, maybe forever in some ways. But I will be all right because he taught me how to carry grief without letting it destroy me. He taught me that loving and losing is still better than never loving at all." Willa lived for 7 more years, remaining active and engaged with her family until the end. She delighted in her great-grandchildren, taught them stories about their grandfather and great-grandfather, and passed down the lessons she had learned through a lifetime of love and loss. When she died peacefully in her sleep in 1927 at the age of 73, she was buried beside Zachary on the hillside overlooking the ranch they had built together. At her funeral, her children and grandchildren spoke of a woman who had faced unimaginable grief and emerged stronger, who had loved fiercely twice in her life, who had built a legacy of courage and compassion. The ranch continued to thrive for generations, passed down through the family, a testament to what 2 people could build when they were brave enough to risk their hearts again. And every evening, as the sun set over the California hills, the family members who inherited that land would think of Willa and Zachary, of the love story that began with a simple question. Why? That question had changed everything. It had opened doors that seemed forever closed, had broken down walls built from grief and fear, had given 2 lonely people a second chance at happiness. And from that one moment of genuine connection, asking why instead of demanding compliance, had grown a love that lasted decades and a family that would carry that love forward for generations to come. The town of Julian never forgot the widow who refused every suitor until a quiet rancher simply asked her why. The story became legend, passed down as an example of the healing power of understanding, of the courage it takes to love again after loss, of the magic that can happen when 2 broken people find each other and choose to be whole together. In the end, that was the true lesson of Willa and Zachary's love. Not that grief could be overcome or forgotten, but that it could be carried, survived, and eventually transformed into something beautiful. Not that second chances came easily, but that they were worth the risk. Not that love could make you complete, but that it could make you brave enough to face life's challenges without being broken by them. Their story was the story of the American West itself. Harsh and beautiful, demanding and rewarding, full of loss and full of hope. It was the story of people who refused to give up, who built lives from nothing, who survived against all odds and created something lasting in the process. And on quiet evenings, When the California sun sets over the mountains and paints the sky in brilliant colors, if you visit that hillside where they are buried, you can almost feel their presence still. Two souls who found each other in darkness and created light together, whose love story began with a simple question and ended with a legacy that would never die.